Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to our Conversations on Women in the Workplace panel discussion, a leadership development event representing the KC Chambers programs genKC, Centurions, and Executive Women's Leadership Council. My name is Christine Manos-Goodwell and I'm the Foundation Manager with the KC Chamber. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us. Inspired by the Harvard Business Review podcast, Women at Work, today's panel discussion will cover the topics of advocacy, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as career mobility, especially during a pandemic. The unique generational perspectives will create a dialogue around women in the workplace in today's climate. During the discussion, please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and the panel will address them during our Q&A period at the end of our session. Before we introduce today's moderator and panelists, I'd like to take a moment and share a little bit about the three Chambers Leadership Development Programs. For more than 10 years, genKC has inspired young professionals to live, work, and thrive in the Kansas City region. The program provides a variety of professional development, community engagement, and networking opportunities to our region's future leaders with emphasis to attract and retain Kansas City's future workforce. Formed in 1976, the Centurions program has become an unequaled training ground for Greater Kansas City's emerging leaders. Participants grow professionally under the program's Learn, Serve, Lead motto by immersing themselves in the influential topics of Kansas City's past, present, and future. The KC Chambers Executive Women's Leadership Council promotes and advocates for women in business leadership positions, as well as instills best practices and shares ideas to support women's success. EWLC also promotes awareness and provides support for the KC Chambers annual Athena Awards celebration. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator and panelists. Susan Johnson, Chief People and Communications Officer at Andrews McMeel Universal and a member of the KC Chambers Executive Women's Leadership Council. In her role on AMU's executive team, Susan has led numerous brand and cultural initiatives contributing to profitable growth and increased associate engagement. Since joining AMU in 2015, Susan established the company's first formal mentorship program, significantly increased commitment to training and development, expanded community investment focus on literacy, and created a new leadership position to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. Prior to joining AMU, Susan spent 15 years at American Century Investments and is engaged in the community, including serving in leadership roles for Children's Mercy Hospital, the Coterie Theater, and United Way of Greater Kansas City. Susan, welcome. Nikki Donovan is the Chief Community Relations Officer of Truman Medical Centers. She's an expert in community building, provides strategic direction in community health education, workforce, and strategic partnership development that leads to improving the health of the community. Nikki also manages the retail services contracts and hospital food service that enrich the experience for patients, guests, and staff. Nikki is the recipient of the Black Healthcare Coalition's Health Equity Award, celebrating individuals who are working to achieve healthcare equity in the Kansas City area. She was appointed to the Executive Women's Leadership Council in January of 2020 and currently serves on the Community Advisory Councils for the Federal Reserve Bank and the Health Forward Foundation. Other community service commitments include Prospect Business Association, Arts KC, the American Jazz Museum, just to name a few. Nikki, thank you for joining us today. Jen Houston is the Community Relations Manager for UMB Financial Corporation, where she works to create opportunities and to be a resource for associates looking to get involved in their communities. Jen oversees the company's workplace giving campaigns and volunteer time off program. She also led the way in the development of the UMB Foundation Matching Gift Program, which launched in 2018. Jen is currently a member of the Centurions Spring Cohort, class of 2021, and previously was a member of genKC. She served on the Urban Neighborhood Initiative's Bus Tour Planning Committee and was instrumental advocate for Better KCI ambassadors. Welcome, Jen. Ellie Webb is a lead program manager for Honeywell FM&T at the Department of Energy's Kansas City National Security Campus. Ellie currently serves as the vice chair for genKC Executive Board and will transition to the chair position in November of this year. Prior to joining Honeywell, Ellie began her career at Koch Industries in Wichita, Kansas. Ellie is also a recent graduate of Central Exchange Emerging Leaders Program. Thank you for joining us, Ellie. Susan, I will let you take it off.
I had a little time before this meeting to get to know these three amazing panelists, and I can't wait to hear their perspectives. As Christine said, we're going to focus on three topics today: advocacy, diversity, and career advancement, with the added interesting angle of the pandemic to our discussion. So I'm going to kick things off in the area of advocacy. And for our first question, Jen, I'd love for you and Ellie to share your thoughts. And my question is, from your perspective and your experience during your career, how have you benefited from a sponsor? And if you would also talk a little bit about how you went about identifying that sponsor and nurturing that relationship. So Jen, you want to start?
Sure. As a community relations manager, relationships are so critically important. And what I found is that sponsors truly can be anywhere. And I'd like to share a suggestion for how to identify sponsorship relationships. Actually, in 2018, I had the opportunity to participate in the Central Exchange Emerging Leaders program. And one of our guest speakers, Patty Phillips, the CEO of Women Leaders in College Sports, shared an acronym with us, YAYA, which stands for you are who you associate with. So she went on to say that you basically are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So when I'm thinking about who I want to sponsor or who I want to be my sponsor, it's important to me that the person has habits and traits that I want to rub off on me. So as far as nurturing those sponsorship relationships, I really see that as a two-way street. As someone's sponsor, you're representing that person in a room that they may not be in. And as your sponsor, they're putting their own reputation on the line. So if somebody goes so far as to recommend you for an opportunity, you really need to be ready to knock it out of the park.
That's awesome. Thank you. Ellie, what about you?
Yeah, that's great advice, Jen. Yaya is something that I also heard out of Patty during the Central Exchange program, and it really resonated, right? It's you're surrounding yourself with people that you want to aspire to be, and people that have traits that you are trying to grow and invest in your own future. The one thing I would add is just to be curious, right? Asking questions about how a specific project or your role fits into the long-term company strategy really starts those potential sponsors thinking about how you fit into their succession plans and looking for those opportunities to fit you in and provide those opportunities for you to grow. And then the only third thing that I would really add is just to be grateful for those opportunities as they come. Make sure that you're thanking those people for those opportunities and really asking for feedback on if that is the intent of bringing you to the table.
That's great. Thank you. My next question on this topic is for you, Nikki. And the ideal worker and what that definition is and what that means has certainly evolved, but maybe not as far as we would like it to. So what do you do personally to mitigate that fallacy of to be the ideal worker, you have to work 40 hours a week or have certain structures or things in place? What do you do, Nikki, in your role and in your leadership to help disperse those myths?
Well, Susan, I'm working on it.
Aren't we all?
I'll be transparent, but I will say this: if for no other reason than don't be a workaholic, consider your health. Now is not the time, especially during a pandemic, to jeopardize your immune system for one. When I read that question, I pulled a few stats for everyone to consider. And so studies have shown that working more than 40 hours a week is associated with alcohol and tobacco consumption, as well as unhealthy weight gain in men and depression in women. I'm not sure if that whole glass of wine counts every evening, but and little productive work occurs after 50 hours per week. And working more than 10 hours a day is associated with a 60% jump in cardiovascular diseases. 10% of those working 50 to 60 hours report relationship problems, and the rate increased to 30% for those who were working more than 60 hours. So in white collar jobs, productivity declines by about as much as 25% when workers put in 60 hours or more. I think those are a few reasons, but many of those problems are tied to stress. And we know that stress raises cortisol levels, which can disrupt your sleep, your appetite, your blood pressure, your immune system, your memory, cognition, mood. I don't know what's left, but so you have to be self-aware, know when you're just fried. I encourage my leaders to take time off, to take the PTO. I let them know they're brilliant when they're fully present, but I can always tell when the tanks are running on empty. So, in my opinion, the pros of not being a workaholic outweigh the cons. And I always say, work smart, work hard, but not too long. And I have to remind myself of that. So,
well, that is great advice. If I could just find out, I'm curious, what is your favorite mode of unwinding and self-care? What do you enjoy doing to relax and kind of make those boundaries for yourself?
Spending time in a room alone with music and aromatherapy.
Nice.
And the September issue of Vogue.
Great.
I will add the glass of wine. Okay.
Everything in moderation, right?
Yes, everything in moderation.
That's great. Ellie, I have a question for you. Another stat, the Harvard Business Review has reported that the average American is actually working more than 3 additional hours a day since the pandemic. If we weren't already working hard enough, we are adding more to our plate during this work from home time, or I call it living at work. What do you do to keep from burning out?
Sure. When the pandemic started, I know I probably went through what a number of young professionals did. I'm in an apartment with a roommate and a dog. We are cramped. And, I found myself getting up. I'd walk into one room, but there's not many places to go in a small apartment. And so I actually started walking, and it was so simple. But, Nikki just talked about self-care and how important it is. And, getting some fresh air and making sure that you are well rested is so important right now, so that you can be your best self at work as well. I read a quote somewhere that was, if you don't prioritize your health now, you'll be forced to take care of it later. And I think that resonates right now more than ever. So taking those walks has been something that has helped me, but I think also just shutting down, and when you're done with work, being done with work. The convenience of having your laptop and your cell phone right next to you all day, every day. I try really intentionally to log out of my computer at the end of the day, so I can't just walk back by and keep typing on that email. It's close it down, log out, shut the door to your office if you have an office, but take that step away and make sure that you are prioritizing the other aspects of your life right now.
That's great advice. Jen, anything you would add?
Nothing I would add, but I wrote down what Nikki said. Work smart, work hard, but not too long. I'm keeping that one.
Me too. I could use that advice. So let's move on to the topic of diversity. And it seems like everywhere we go, every virtual conference I attend, DEI is on everyone's mind, but we all don't share the same definitions of what that means. And every company, I think, is working on this issue, but maybe in different ways. So I would love really to hear from each of you, but starting, Jen, with you and then Nikki, what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you?
Susan, this is such a complex question. In my professional career, I'm often the youngest, the only woman, and the only person of color in a room. And I'm sure that many of us have talked about the idea of the only, of some identity in any situation. And so for so many years, we've been tackling gender diversity issues in the workplace. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of today's discussion on women in the workplace. But as the discussion around DEI continues to evolve, it's very important to me that we do as much work and have as many tough conversations about other ways we as people are diverse beings. Intersectionality, the idea that we all occupy more than one identity and that we can simultaneously benefit from power and maybe marginalized by lack of power, is where I'm currently exploring diversity, equity, and inclusion. And by reflecting on how my thoughts and actions have changed over time, it's helped me to grow and to come to terms with the fact that this is really hard, difficult, and frustrating work. But most importantly, it's really critical and it's necessary. And I've made mistakes along the way. And unfortunately, I'm probably going to make mistakes in the future. But that's what keeps me moving forward in this journey. And why I also pause to give folks grace while I extend grace to somebody who might have a misstep or who might say something offensive or hurtful. It's the idea that we've all been there. We couldn't possibly know or understand or empathize with every other person's situation or circumstances, but we have to listen and learn from one another. So for me, this idea is really summed up in Maya Angelou's quote, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better."
That's awesome. I love that idea of extending grace and have that brave conversation. Nikki, what are your thoughts and what does it mean to you and how do you define diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, first of all, I will say, Jen, I can relate. But I do think it's critical to distinguish the difference between those terms and not just get in the habit of making them a buzz phrase or just window dressing, in business. And, so diversity means understanding that each individual is unique and demonstrating the ability to recognize our individual differences. Inclusion means that all people, regardless of their abilities, disabilities, and any other human traits, have the right to be respected and appreciated as valuable members of their communities and in the workplace. And equity is giving everyone what they need to be successful. Now, I want to make another distinction that can also be misunderstood, and that is equity is much different than equality. And equality is treating everyone the same. And equality aims to promote fairness, but it can only work if everyone starts from the same place and needs the same help. Inequities occur when biased or unfair programs or policies, practices, or situations contribute to lack of equality in the performance or the results or the outcomes. And it's one of the reasons why many times efforts geared toward diversity and inclusion don't seem to be successful. Without equity, you can diversify your team by adding an African American, another person of color, a minority, or whatever, only to find that it's a poor fit or they don't seem to stack up to others on the team. But without considering equity in this situation, you've missed out on the benefits of becoming diverse. You've got to prepare. You got to be prepared to know that where that person came from and whatever they were equipped with might not be the same advantages as everyone else that's on the team. Maybe they didn't have the same type of housing, healthcare, education, previous job experiences, etc. So it's so common for us to hear, we just can't seem to find any diverse candidates for our job opening. And it means you're looking for someone just like yourself, and those diverse candidates most likely, they've never had the same life advantages or experiences that you've had, but it does not mean that they can excel in the role with the right support system in place. And I just believe the most effective teams are diverse teams, because you also gain more creative and diverse thinking, which means you can produce more impactful solutions when problem solving or developing new products, programs, systems, processes. So I'm a firm believer in DE&I when it's sincere and done with the intent to produce better outcomes and not just lip service. But so it's important.
Thank you. Those are great guideposts for all of us. Ellie, I would love to hear from you what characteristics or traits that you believe women uniquely bring to the workplace.
Sure. So the one that came to mind when you just said that was empathy. We we're talking a lot about diversity and inclusion and what that means. And I think women have a unique ability to put themselves in other people's shoes and really think through some of what that looks like, right? Just to add to the conversation we just had, I think a lot of the biases we have are unconscious. You know, it's a result of years of our upbringing, of the opportunities that we were provided. And so intentionally keeping DEI at the forefront of your mind and at the forefront of the conversation and speaking up, women, I think, have the ability to empathize with those that maybe didn't have the same upbringing and opportunities that we had. And so that's something that when I think of a woman's opportunity in the workplace is really to speak up. You know, we recognize it and others in the room may not. And so if you do, don't stay quiet, say something and start to change the conversation.
Nikki, what would you add?
The power of a woman's intuition. So women are much better than men at reading people's emotions. It's known as cognitive empathy, our ability to be able to understand another person's emotional state just at a glance. So I read in this study, about 90,000 people, women and men, were asked to look at photographs of people's eyes and ask what they thought that person's mood was. And women consistently outperformed men. Sorry guys, if there's any guys on today. But while these feelings can be red flags, telling you to sit up and pay attention, don't discredit them just because they don't immediately support or support it by the type of logic you're familiar with. You know, brain is a powerful and mysterious thing, and feelings ultimately come from the brain. Now you do have to be cautious in how you let that factor into making business decisions, because if it doesn't go the way you felt it was going to go, you won't have a reasonable defense going to your boss and say it just felt right, you know, right? And so instead, don't ignore the feelings, but let them inspire you to deeper investigation about a situation. When your gut is telling you something, pause and listen. Put things into place with a fresh perspective and try to find out what you're not consciously seeing. And intuition, it's not a replacement for logical and rational decision making, but ladies, use your magical powers to enhance the normal process, right?
So different perspectives are so valuable, and sometimes it's hard to see those perspectives or appreciate them. So my question for Ellie is, what are some traits that you see in women of a younger generation or maybe earlier in their career that you wish women who are more senior or further along exhibited? And then vice versa, what do you see in women who are in more positions of leadership or experience that you wish younger women would exhibit in their workplace behaviors?
Yeah, sure. I'll try really hard not to offend anyone with my generalizations here.
You have lots of greats, right?
Yes, absolutely. So as far as traits that I see in younger women that I wish more senior women would maybe exhibit, the eagerness to learn something new. You know, that's a big stereotype. I've worked with women in every stage of their career that are eager, but I do think when you enter the workforce, you don't have a good basis for the way a company does things. And so you're more eager to learn something new, learn something maybe outside of your swim lane that can only make you more diverse in thought and aware of what's happening across the business. You know, I've worked with a few women in the past that are a little bit further along in their career that have maybe gotten comfortable. And I wish sometimes that I would see them, you know, push the bounds a little bit and try to learn outside of their lane. In the reverse, I also, one of my favorite quotes is, it's basically listening to understand instead of listening to respond. That's something that I really admire in my boss and others that I've worked for in the past. I think there is a patience there to really understand the problem at hand versus trying to make sure that your voice is heard. You're trying to understand a situation instead of respond to a situation. And that's something that I think comes with time and experience, and something that I strive for is not to listen with an immediate response on the tip of my tongue, but to really understand what is being asked of me before piping in with my 2 cents.
Thank you. That's great. Jen, you are blazing new trails at UMB and also in our community. I would love to hear a little bit about what you would consider some of your biggest challenges over the past 6 months, and maybe how you've navigated those.
Yeah, so by the very nature of my role at UMB, it is being out in the community and visiting with folks. You know, I joke, but I'm serious, that a person does not go into a job like mine to sit at home alone in her office. And I really had to take some time to recognize that it was a struggle for me. And I am feeling really fortunate and aware that I get the luxury of feeling this stress real time. I'm not responsible for another human being. I don't have kiddos yet. And so I can feel the feels in real time. And I just worry about and am trying to look out for my colleagues and friends who might just be in survival mode right now. And I'm hoping that because I got to feel it real time, I can be there for them to be strong whenever it might hit them later, and to help support them in whatever way that looks like, as folks are working to make sure their kids are educated and food is on the table and work is still getting done.
So important. Thank you. Well, I want to switch topics now to career mobility and navigating that roadmap and journey amidst the pandemic and the unique challenges and opportunities that brings. And Nikki, I would love to start with you. And I think this is a question that's great to ask, and I'm excited to get your perspective at any time. But if you could add particularly during the pandemic, what distinguishes a leader?
Well, you know, I think this is not just during the pandemic, but maybe especially during the pandemic.
Yeah, there we go. Most important.
What we know for sure is that doing leadership actions or holding leadership positions don't make you a leader. And I think that people are often confused by the two. And I found some examples of the difference between leadership versus being a leader. And here's just a few of them. I won't share all of them with you, but to cast a vision is leadership. To be a visionary is to be a leader. To organize people toward an objective is leadership. To be influential is to be a leader. To solve problems is leadership. To recognize opportunities is to be a leader. And based on just those few that I've shared, I'm thinking you notice the difference between, there was no reference to position and where you land in an organizational chart, org chart doesn't have anything to do with being a leader, because true leaders really stand out in their ability to, you know, infect their team members with their own spirit. And during this pandemic, true leaders really know how to pivot and, you know, take the ball and run with it right where they are, because at least in healthcare, none of our jobs looked the same as they did, you know, 6 months ago or, you know, a year ago. And so being able to transition whenever you have to do whatever you need to do to get the job done is just really important. And then I'll always say that you have to have enough humility, especially during this time. So I think Jen had mentioned something, you know, people are going through a lot, and, you know, you really can't just take for granted that, you know, even in our roles, you can say, oh my God, they're not carrying the ball, they're not doing their job. Well, you really don't know exactly what they're going through. And so, yeah, you've got to have some self-awareness, and and be a leader. That's all I can tell you. It's good, but it's not easy.
No.
Yeah, yeah, no, it really isn't. Your staff will respect you, though.
That's right. I think being vulnerable with them and just sharing that it's hard for you too is important, and just making that connection, creating that space for that is so critical right now, because it certainly
Yes,
doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon, does it?
it doesn't seem
Getting
to.
harder. I think
I
it's
know.
getting harder all the time for folks, and just
Yeah.
feeling it more.
Yeah.
So much uncertainty.
Yes.
So, Jen, a thought for you that you could expand on. How do you think female leaders can make themselves indispensable, especially during this pandemic? We talked earlier about the unique way that women can be empathetic and maybe see things others don't, but would love to hear more about your thoughts on being indispensable, especially now.
So I sort of happened into the situation that I feel makes me indispensable, and it was really my first job out of college. I worked at the Mid-America Regional Council, and if anybody's familiar with Mark, you know that they're doing all sorts of things all across the region. And I worked on the public affairs team, and the way that group was structured is you met all of the communications needs for a specific program or set of departments. And so that meant you did the graphic design, you wrote the content, you made the PowerPoint presentations, coded your own HTML emails, and I learned a ton. And that has really made me a communications generalist. And so in this time of uncertainty, especially in a pandemic where we're all having to do different things than what we were hired to do, my team is able to sort of rely on me, and I can flex and use a different skill set that they may not have hired me for. For me, I enjoy sort of the variety that this adds to my day-to-day work. I don't do the same thing every day. And from my employer standpoint, I think that it helps me add value because they can be more agile and adjust to whatever situation is around the corner, which we never would have guessed was a global pandemic.
No. Well, they're lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Ellie, so if you are looking to advance in your career right now in this crazy pandemic time, when you may or may not see your boss or superiors or others on a regular basis, what does career mobility look like? How do you go about that?
So I think Jen hit on a topic that I was actually going to mention related to this. I think right now we're all doing jobs that none of us were hired to do. To think differently, to adjust to the new normal and what our workforce looks like now. It's different at every company, and understanding what your company is doing and how you fit into that can really position you to continue to grow your career, even though you may be working remotely or in a very different situation than you were 6 months ago. It's really an opportunity to capitalize on what those business needs are. Look for solutions to problems that you're trying to overcome, and understand if there's an opportunity that it's something that could benefit the entire company and not just your team. On a more personal level, not in that way up here, 30,000 foot, I have a tendency to look at the clouds a lot. Setting up time just with your natural team as well as your leadership to make sure that they're informed of what you're working on. Out of sight, out of mind, you're home now 9 hours a day instead of in a chair right across from them, keeping them up to date on even an email that you sent. We taking the initiative and setting those up proactively instead of waiting for leadership to tell you what to do, I think will highlight your leader abilities, even if you're not in a leadership role. So continuing to be proactive about that and really stepping up and shining through in a time when everyone's just trying to keep moving forward.
That's great. Nikki, I know you just took a drink of water, so not fair to catch you.
I'm flexible.
What would you add to either the topic of being indispensable and what we can do as women to uniquely show that as leaders, and then any career mobility advice for our great participants today?
I would say stay uncomfortable. When you're being challenged or you challenge yourself, it feels a little uneasy. You know, you start to take on that extra role or a different role, but you're growing. And I had a situation where I was asked to be a financial secretary of an organization. And so, you know, after the hair stood up on the back of my neck and then I finished hyperventilating and I worked through all the PTSD from college algebra 2, you know, I mean, I agreed to do it. And I'm happy to say, you know, we cleared the audit and it was great. I made it through it. But, you know, I would have naturally just said, yeah, no, math's not my strong suit. You know, I'm a little bit more for the arts and creative and I build relationships and I just want to talk to people. But I have to tell you, you do learn new skills that way. And you do make yourself indispensable in an organization the more you are willing to step out of your lane and your role and do something different, take a risk. So, yeah.
I love that. It reminds me of Ellie's comment earlier about the traits of just being eager to learn. And I just think that's keeps it interesting, keeps it.
Yes, Ellie said it. Ellie said the key word, uncomfortable. Yeah. So when you get comfortable, you're probably stuck.
So here's my last question, and then we're going to move to a Q&A, but it's for all of you. And as still on the topic of leadership, but if you had a chance to ask one question of your dream CEO, what would it be? And Jen, why don't we start with you?
I'm really interested in companies and organizations that are ready to take strong social stands and recognize that, unfortunately, that means you might potentially lose some business. So I would ask a CEO, what sort of models did they run to determine if the company could withstand taking a specific position? Does the math hold up, or was it purely following their heart?
That's great. Ellie, what about you?
That's a really tough question. I'd say a question for my dream CEO would be what the biggest pivot was in their career and the decision that led to that pivot. You know, we've talked about putting yourself outside of your comfort zone. I think understanding what led my dream CEO to be my dream CEO would probably help me empathize with how they got to that place and what type of a leader we'd want to work for. So we've talked a lot about building relationships and the importance of that. And I think that those are the types of questions that I would probably broach if I ever had the opportunity.
Nikki?
You know, I'd want to know if they had to do it all over again. Number one, would they do it? And number two, what would they have done differently? I know being a CEO has to be a tough role, and you know, you always hear it's lonely at the top. And you know, I'm sure there have been a lot of barriers that they've been able to break through, and challenges that they were able to overcome. And if they're human, and they are, they've made some mistakes along the way. And so I would be curious to know, would you have done this again, or would you have just decided to, you know, go off and play the drums in the band?
Was it worth it?
Right. Was it worth it? Was it worth the sacrifices? You know, so. Yeah.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. It's been such an honor to get to ask you these fun questions. And I think all of you would make dream CEOs. And I, for one, would love to work with you or for you. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay now so she can start our Q&A, because I'm sure there are lots of questions for each of you.
Yes, well, I want to thank you all so much again for being here today and for your time. This was a really great conversation that I know that I've taken a lot from and will share as well. So there were great questions, many questions submitted in the registration as well as in the chat. a lot of questions around DEI. So we will start with DEI. One of the questions, and this came from the chat, thank you to the men who are joining us today and supporting women in the workplace, but how can men better help empower women and be better allies? Can we go ahead and start? We'll go ahead and start with Nikki on that one.
I would say, be an advocate to the women that you work with in your workplace, and champion them. You don't necessarily have to mentor a woman, because it may be a colleague, but be an advocate on their behalf in any situation. When it comes to DE&I, I think about that when we're all sitting in a room together at meetings, like Jen said, and she's the only person of color in the room. Well, if you're in the room with a bunch of men and there's one woman, speak up and ask why, address it, do something about it. Yeah.
So tagging on to that, Jen, how do you distinguish yourself? You are in a very male-dominated industry. How do you distinguish yourself in a room full of men?
Well, I've been very fortunate, and this is sort of a tactical example that men on the call could take with them, is to allow a woman to present her own work. I've been fortunate that my leaders have invited me to the table and invited me so that I had the opportunity to tell our executive leadership team about the matching gift program that I was proposing, for example. So for the men on the call, when you've got a great team member, man or woman, let them present their own work if they can. And then also sort of checking one another. So we might witness an example of mansplaining, or where a man gets credit for an idea that actually was said just moments earlier by a female. And it might not be appropriate in that moment in a group setting to call that person out, but afterwards, can you take someone aside and say, hey, that was really so-and-so's idea. You should let her know that you appreciated it. So just 2 ideas for tactical things we can do to lift up women.
Great. So another question around DEI. Ellie, can you talk about how to start a DEI initiative at your workplace, or really how to get the conversation around DEI started?
Sure. So I've been really fortunate working for Honeywell. We're a large organization. So our HR group, in partnership with a lot of the natural divisions, have developed employee resource groups. It's been an easy avenue to start those conversations with established groups versus trying to start something completely fresh on your own. I don't have a lot of experience in smaller companies. I'm speaking more to the larger organizations, but I think leveraging those opportunities where they exist, work with your direct supervisor, work with your HR generalist, work with communications, whoever that organization is for your company. Insert yourself into the conversation. Find what the appropriate, insertion point is, and then change the conversation to, bring DEI to the forefront of people's minds and to the table. I will say we have a number of groups at Honeywell, and I'm involved in all of them because I want to be aware. I want to know what's going on. And even if I don't attend all of the meetings, it's just being cognizant of the different efforts that are in work and the value that they're going to add to your own thought processes and to your own day-to-day experiences with your company and in your personal life as well. So that would be my advice, is to look for opportunities to leverage existing conversations.
Lindsay, if I could just add on to what Ellie said, I think she brings up such a wonderful point. So many of our organizations have these affinity groups or BRGs or ERGs or whatever your company calls them. And we might be tempted to immediately go to the one that is the identity that we relate to. And that's awesome. You'll find your people and you will enjoy each other's company and make great relationships. But you can learn just as much and feel just as great about attending or becoming a member of one of these BRGs that is not an identity that is yours. it's a safer place where you can ask questions and learn and find out about their experiences. And so I think that's so awesome that Ellie is, raising her hand and joining those organizations, even if, she doesn't necessarily relate.
That's really great. So I guess in addition to that, and thinking in terms of allyship, how can you really push your company to hire and promote more women in leadership positions, especially BIPOC or Black, Indigenous, people of color women? Nikki, can you speak to that?
Well, if you've already got a seat at the table in your company as a woman, then it really is time for you to step up and be that voice for the other women that are out there probably seeking opportunities. And they may not have it without you opening that door for them and helping to open that door for them. I always think about that quote of there's a special place in hell for other women that don't help other women. And, you have to share basically what other women can bring to the table as well. And you demonstrate that in your own walk in your organization. And so you got to speak up.
There was a great question in the chat. You just said, it's our job as a woman to advocate for other women. And there was a question in the chat, how do you deal with competitive women in the workplace? I find at times women see other women as competition instead of an ally. Jen, are you able to speak to any instances of that you might have had?
My initial thought there is to find out how you can benefit each other, right? You don't necessarily have to be great friends, but there might be something that she needs that you can help with based on your respective roles in the organization. And so how can you find out what she might need and if there's anything you can do to help, and vice versa? Is there something you need a hand with that she might be able to get you closer to because of her position? So take advantage of the competitiveness, I guess, is the quick answer.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Jen, I'll add to that. I was going to say it's a great opportunity when you have someone directly competing with you to learn from each other, right? Your leadership is recognizing great qualities in both of you if you're truly in competition. And so there's something that you're both bringing to the table that your leadership recognizes. So learn from each other, and if you both rise, that you're still accomplishing the goal of progressing your career. So exactly what you said, Jen, leverage that opportunity and, learn how you both ended up in that position to be directly competing.
I'll just add, catch them off guard a little bit, help them out.
Yes, kill them with kindness. Okay, so we had a lot of questions also that were around balancing work and life, especially in a pandemic. So one of the questions that came through is, currently there is an added challenge for women in the workforce having to balance their career while also having children at home and likely homeschooling. Any advice on how to manage all of these?
Okay, I'm just going to take a stab at it. But I do think it boils down to organization and working smart. You may have to carve out specific windows of time and address the priorities in that way, and try not to feel overwhelmed because you're thinking about getting everything done, the work done, the kids fed, the kids tutored, carve out your time and manage not only your expectations, but your kids' expectations and the rest of your family's expectations. And, I've got a lot on my plate. And so this is how this is going to look. Between this time, we're going to do this, and this time we're going to do this. And I know it won't be perfection, but you have to start by not overwhelming yourself, I think, for one.
I already mentioned that I don't have children, so I can't relate firsthand, but I have been really glad to see our leadership's approach at UMB, which is to take the time you need to take care of your family because you're a better employee if the rest of your world is cared for. And some of the ways with folks whose schedules allow it, you know, if you need to be helping kids with school during the day, then maybe you're answering emails in the evening. But don't assume that because you got an email at 10 p.m., there's an expectation that you immediately respond. That's what that employee was having to do to balance everything that was happening in their life. And so we're all just doing the best we can and working with the situation that we have. And so if your company has the flexibility to extend that to your employees, go ahead and give them permission to work a different set of hours as long as they're getting the key tasks complete.
Thank you for sharing what some of your leadership is doing to support your team during this time. So another question that came through is, can you still be an effective leader, maintaining visibility and ensuring engagement when working from home? So Ellie, can you share any strategies that you have around this and ideas on how this might be accomplished?
So I talked a little bit earlier about, you know, taking the initiative and those practice steps to have regular touch points with your team. I think right now it's really figuring out how to do that, keeping in the back of your mind that every employee is in a different situation. You know, we have, my team has 3 or 4 that have kiddos that are in the 2 to 5 range, and then some that have teenagers, and then some like myself that don't have kids. And so trying to balance and find the 30 minutes every other day to have that conversation and make sure that there's no one flailing or that needs help navigating this tough environment. That's the advice that I would give. I think past that, it is really being agile. You know, Jen talked about that a little bit earlier, and making sure that you are ready to adjust to changing priorities. I know our company, it feels we get an email every 2 days that changes and says, okay, you're working from home until now, and then changes again a week later and says, just kidding, it's until January. So making sure that you are ready to make those adjustments and adjust to the changing priorities of your company and your specific role, and making sure that you're meeting your leadership's expectation and also providing those expectations to those that are that you're managing and working with in your natural teams. I think the biggest thing is making sure that there's clear communication across whatever platform your company is using right now on how we keep progressing.
Great, thank you. So this question is for you, Nikki. Do you see COVID having an impact on the role of women in the workforce? And if so, maybe what does that look like?
Gosh, COVID's going to have an impact on everybody in the workplace. I'm not sure how we make it exclusive to women, quite honestly, but you know, women tend to run the household and take care of the kids. They're the users and the choosers of healthcare, and so I mean, that alone keeps them busy without even COVID. So with COVID-19, I gotta tell you, Lindsay, I don't know what makes it any different. I really don't. But you know, working in healthcare, we see it every day. We see the impact on people, period, men, women, children. And so I don't know that this will have a different impact on women than men, quite honestly. Sorry, that doesn't help much, but
I know that was a tough
different perspective, but it's a tough time, you know.
It really is.
Mm-hmm.
So can you talk a little bit, so now kind of shifting to the topic of career mobility, can you talk about how, if I think this happens to all of us, but how we get in our own way, and how do you combat that?
You got to tell your girlfriend to go for that job, right? We all know that, well, this is an overgeneralization, but it's often stated that a man will have 2 of the 10 qualifications listed on the job description and will raise his hand and say, it's me, pick me. And a woman will have 9 out of 10 and say, well, I'm missing this one piece. I'm not going to throw my hat in the ring. And so when we see our girlfriends doing that, we have to help lift them up and encourage them to throw their hat in the ring and to help them see why they are the right person and why they're bringing something to the table that that job description didn't even ask for.
Yeah, I gotta agree. I think that women, we tend to a lot of times doubt our own capabilities. And, you know, if you find yourself in that situation, hopefully you have a peer or a colleague that you trust and that you can speak to in confidence, because I think the way we are perceived is a lot different than how we perceive ourselves in many cases. And I think it is really easy for us to maybe always feel just a little bit less than some of the men in the workplace. And that's a bit systemic, unfortunately, you know, in our society. And I think we are starting to address it. And but yeah, don't doubt yourself, you know, and it's okay to make mistakes. I think we feel horrible if we make a mistake. And as you said earlier, it's an overgeneralization, but you know, guys can kind of screw up and be like, go on back to getting it done. And we're going to pine over it. We're going to analyze why we did it, how we could have done differently. And so, yeah, stop beating yourself up.
Ellie, how about you? How do you, I guess, combat those fraudy feelings or imposter syndrome as we call it sometimes?
Yeah, I think Jen mentioned it. She's often the only woman in the room. I feel that way sometimes about being the only young professional in the room. I've been fortunate enough to have sponsors in my career that have given me opportunities to step into those roles and those positions. genKC being one of them. I've been so fortunate to be part of this organization. And, you know, I constantly have to remind myself that somebody asked me to be here. You know, I've worked really hard, but I didn't just show up and invite myself to this conversation and to the table. And, you know, taking that perspective on those situations where you feel uncomfortable and you feel like you don't deserve to be there, you didn't show up on your own, right? You bring something unique to the table, and somebody saw that perspective and the skill set that you have that's going to add value to the conversation. That's something that I struggle with daily. I think a lot of women do, is, you know, keeping that perspective and not thinking I'm in my own head. This is my situation that I've created for myself. It's no, you have a team of people supporting you and advocating for you in the workplace, and reminding yourself of that frequently is, I think, really important.
Great. All right. So I think we have time for one last question. I'm going to go back to the DEI topic. We had a DEI question in the chat, and a lot of people are wanting to know what do you find the biggest errors made by companies with good intent pursuing DEI initiatives, or any advice that you have for, again, implementing DEI strategies in the workplace?
Lindsay, I want to just throw in a comment here, and because it's something that we are really learning and trying to listen and understand. But Nikki said something earlier that really rings true for me, and that it is not a fad. It's not just something that you do because it's the latest business thing to do, or it's in the headline. You do it because you believe in it, and you do it because you're committed to the long term. Because it will, and you will make mistakes. It's just going to happen, but you have to start and you have to show clear action, but it has to come from a place of deep commitment for the long term. It doesn't mean that you don't adjust your strategy or try different things, but I think that the biggest mistake we make as companies is thinking, okay, let's just go hire more Black people, or let's just go, you know, have some inclusion or unconscious bias training. And it has to really be integrate it into what you do and really believe that it is part of your company. Otherwise, it won't work. And that's just a comment and from someone who's learning and trying and, you know, hoping to show real progress.
Great. Well, oh, go ahead, Nikki.
Oh, I was just going to say, and of course, Susan, you're so right. But I would say another component of that is ensuring that your leadership really does buy into DE&I. It's got to be more than just okay, let's go form this group and let's form a committee, and everybody throughout the organization kind of does their little things, and we have you know, tacos and Fiesta and Cinco de Mayo, and you know, but leadership really has to include that as part of their performance and put metrics to it.
Yes.
You know, it's a business goal. It should be. So.
Each of us have. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Ellie. I would just sort of hit on both of those points. I appreciate so much that Nikki sort of identified for us how DE and I are their own distinct separate pieces of the puzzle. And once we have some successes, we need to celebrate them, right? Because there is a business case for diversity. And when you see that by bringing additional folks on board and to the table, that expanded your reach in a particular market, or that led to the acquisition of new business, go ahead and celebrate that so that other folks who might be slower to get on board with these conversations can see the business case. Sometimes that's what it takes to get others on the train with you.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add was really just the personal responsibility associated with that. Absolutely agree with everything that was said, but we each have our own responsibility to make sure that the day-to-day conversations and when we're put in positions to influence some of those policies, some of those groups, some of those metrics that we absolutely need to do that, right? You know, we can talk a big game, but it's our personal responsibility to make it happen.
Well, thank you all so much again for being here today. I am just really grateful for the time that we shared together and was able to learn a lot from all of you. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Christine.
Thank you so much, everyone. We greatly appreciate it. We hope that you found this afternoon's discussion inspiring, insightful, and engaging. Thank you to our moderator, Susan, and to our panelists, Nikki, Jen, and Ellie. Thank you for your time, wisdom, and commitment to Kansas City. Sponsors like J.E. Dunn, SS&C, BOK Financial, Waddell & Reed Financial, Bank Midwest, and KPMG, who support these leadership development programs, help to make conversations like this possible. So thank you. To learn more about these programs and what we do, you may visit our website, and we'd also like to invite all of you to join us on Thursday, October 8th, 2 weeks from today at 3:30 p.m. when we honor the 2020 Athena Award recipients, Karen Daniel and Chelsea Lobb, women who are opening the pathways for others in Kansas City and beyond. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Bye, everybody.